Okay, so I want to do some translations with you from natural language into either universally or existentially quantified sentences of PL. Now, there is actually many approaches to this, or many ways of thinking about it, might be a better way to say it. One of them is the following. It seems like many of you intuitively recognize sort of the going back to Aristotle's categorical logic, the standard form of categorical propositions. Many of you remember that, and you like to think about it in those terms. So that helps. You can basically take a sentence like whales are mammals, and you kind of naturally recognize that all that's really saying is all whales are mammals. The same thing with any whale is a mammal. What is that really saying? Again, all whales are mammals. Some of you are actually very good at recognizing this. And if that's sort of, intuitive to you, then you can kind of take this easier way of doing it. You can kind of recognize that roughly those shapes, correspond to universal affirmatives. There might be some other, cases that are also universal affirmative. I just listed four here, but some of you are pretty good at recognizing that form. And if you can do that, once you know it's a universal affirmative, you can easily go into this here logical shape. Technically, it's simply a universal quantifier and a conditional, right? Where whatever so the way you want to think about it is the subject goes here and the predicate goes there. So all whales are here, mammals are here, and the whale corresponds to the P and the mammals to the Q. So that's one way of doing this, sort of naturally recognizing what it would be in standard form of categorical propositions. And obviously there's one for each of these. So slide 2 here on, there's a practice section in the lesson. So slide 2 is for universal affirmatives. The next one is universal negatives, on and on, right? So you can check those out, and that might be one good way of doing this, but I have another suggestion too. Some of you might have a more difficult time kind of intuiting what the categorical proposition really is saying, what the standard form in categorical logic is. So you might actually have to go back to those lessons on standard form in categorical propositions, all the way back to Unit 1. And you just literally have to translate each and every sentence into the form quantifier, a subject term, a copula, and a predicate term. So you might have to go back and do that. And that's okay. It might take a little while longer, but once you do that, then you'll be able to recognize whether it's a universal affirmative, or maybe it's a universal negative, or maybe it's the particular affirmative, some FRG, right? Or maybe it's the particular negative, some FR not G. So once you're able to do that, this slide, slide 10 of the practice problems, or the practice section of this lesson, is a very, very important slide. This tells you essentially the logical structure in PL of all the categorical propositions in standard form. So this is everything, right? So that's how you say all blank are blank. This is how you say no blank are blank. Some blank are blank. Some blank are not blank. It's all right there. So very important slide for you to look at while you are doing these practice problems. With that all being said, how should you do these problems? Well, I'm going to go over my reasoning process through, I don't know, 2 or 3 of these, and then hopefully that helps you. But obviously you should try to first hone in on what works better for you. So let's try number 1 here. Some of you just read that all human beings are intrinsically valuable creatures, and you immediately recognize, oh, that's standard form for a categorical proposition. That is definitely an A-type sentence. So if you can recognize that right away, fantastic. All that's really happening here is all, and then blank are blank. All human beings, how about H for human beings, are intrinsically valuable creatures. So notice here, that's an adverb acting on this here adjective, acting here on this noun. This is all one big category, right? Intrinsically valuable creatures. There are things that are intrinsically valuable. So how about we use, I don't know, an I for that. So that's the standard form there. And with that said, you can easily translate that into the form of it in PL, the category, the logical form of it. So all you have to do here is carry down all the parts. So how do you read this? That just says, we begin, it's a universally quantified sentence. That's the first part that you read. That's the main logical operator. So for all x, if x is a human, then x is an intrinsically valuable creature. And that's how you do number one. Okay, let's do one more at least. How about number two? Why not? Some human beings are interested in poetry and some human beings are not. Okay, well, let's go ahead and force that into standard form for categorical logic. So that's clearly some blank are blank, but it's also saying, you know, here's the and, right? So let me erase something so you can see that more clearly. Notice that and right there, that is clearly a logical operator. So clearly two things are being said there. I'm going to go ahead and put an and right there because I already know that's the logical operator that I'm going to translate it into, right? I know that and in English is an ampersand in the PL. So some human beings are interested in poetry and some human beings are not. So what's being said here is, I hope you can recognize this, two I-type sentences. Some blank are blank, sorry. One type I-type sentence and one O-type sentence. So some blank are blank and some blank are not blank. That's what's happening here. Some human beings are, let's not use an I again, let's use a P for interest in poetry. And some human beings are not interested in poetry. So that is how you translate that first into, kind of force it into standard form of categorical logic. And now we turn that, it's much easier to turn that into PL. So here's what we do. We know from the slide earlier, we know that this requires an existential quantifier. So let's use, there exists an X such that X is a human and X is interested in poetry. Oh, but you know what? There's also some X that is also human, right? It's still human, but they're actually not into poetry at all, right? And so that is how you would translate number two into PL. Now, one other thing I should point out here, I used the same variable twice, right? I used X both times, but some people like to kind of, you know, keep in mind that they're talking about two different things, right? Some people are in poetry, some people are not. So it's totally okay if you would prefer to use a Y here. So there exists a Y such that Y is human and Y is not into poetry. So that's totally okay too. In a way, I see how that makes sense to people. X's are into poetry, Y's are not into poetry. So if you want to do that, that's okay. What's important to note though, is that the scope of this here existential quantifier ends, so it applies to the parentheses, so it ends right here. So essentially at that point, X is fair game again. You can use X again if you want to. You can use X throughout a sentence as long as it doesn't bleed into another quantifier's scope. So we'll talk more about that later. But just notice here that this quantifier, its scope ends right here. So technically it's fair game again. You can use it in the next conjunct. In this case, we didn't, right? But it's possible. Okay. I think you'll have fun with the rest of them. They're all, I think, pretty straightforward. Yeah,